it was so overwhelming, and I found myself in tears on that stage and praying with people after for you and your family. And not just because of what you've gone through, but also because of how you continue to change lives with that. Are you willing to share that story?
Sure. Of course, Kyle is talking about the death of my daughter. My then 15-year-old daughter died almost just over 2 years ago.
Toasting to triumphs and celebrating the unbreakable American spirit. Welcome to Choir Practice. Brought to you by Law Enforcement Today.
I am super excited for this episode that has been literally years in the making. We've got my good friend Bill Alexander who's coming on. We'll get to him and his story and background first. A couple of quick shout outs. First of all, our friends over at Warrior 12 sent what might be one of my favorite new shirts. Faith is my compass. We end up opening up every episode here with a word of prayer, and I think it's going to be super relevant, especially for today's episode, because of the meaning of this organization and everything they stand for. I also want to give a big shout out. These guys sent a case of its New Testaments, and it's got the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution in it, America's Life Reference. And so they've sent this up just for us to give out to every single guest on the show. So that one is for you.
Thank you very much.
Of course, man. Bernie, why don't you dive in and tell everyone who you are, man?
Bernie Helms, retired police officer from Manchester, Connecticut.
Co-host here for the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of my best friends in the world, and just super blessed to have him. And so, Bill, we're going to dive into your story. I'm just going to open up with a word of prayer real quick. Father God, we thank you for the opportunity to come together once again. We thank you for sending Bill into our lives. We thank you for the leadership that he brings, for his service to this community, to the country, to the law enforcement family. Lord, we ask you to continue to work through him in helping others and impact lives. We ask you to help us to honor the fallen and the families of the fallen and everyone in law enforcement today with this show. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Who are you?
Well, Kyle, thank you so much. You've been threatening for years to invite me to the famous wall of whiskey, and it's finally a reality. And seriously, though, I'm just incredibly humbled to be here. I'm incredibly humbled to be here in part because of the predecessors who have sat in this very same chair, titans in the law enforcement industry. And I'm also really humbled to be here to help tell the story, to help tell the story of the men and women who right now in our country are serving and in too many cases sacrificing their lives in an effort to protect us, to protect our community. So to be even a small part of that story, to help tell the story of those very same men and women is incredibly humbling, and I'm incredibly appreciative that both of you would take a few minutes and have a conversation.
We love having you here. And he actually went like way above and beyond. Not only did he bring a bottle of whiskey to the whiskey wall, like many other people have forgotten to do lately, but he actually sent it around Christmas time. So what's the story with this?
So the sergeant in San Diego, Nick, First Responder Whiskey Society, they came to us and they said, hey, we'd love to partner with the Memorial Fund to help raise money for the memorial walls, to help celebrate and honor the men and women who have died in the line of duty. And they came up with some unique bottles of whiskey just for us. They also do a police week bottle, but this was their holiday bottle. And so I thought, what better gift to send my friend Kyle than this very cool bottle of whiskey.
That's awesome. So now you got to sign it so that it goes on the wall. And while you do, give us a little bit about your backstory. First of all, what you do now, because I don't think we actually officially said that yet. So what do you do now, but your backstory of how you got into this family?
So I joined the Air Force right out of high school. My parents, of course, wanted me to go to college, and they had no greater dream than for me to go to college. And I said, no, I have this wild hair. All I wanted to do for my young life was go be a police officer, and I had the opportunity to join the Air Force and do just that. I also thought, oh, I will go in part maybe explore the world and go to some cool location, maybe Hawaii or Germany. And I grew up in Northern Virginia. I got stationed at Andrews Air Force Base, which is right in Maryland, probably the closest Air Force base to my home. So I didn't really see the world, but I did start a burgeoning law enforcement career. And I tell people there is a quite stark difference between being a police officer in the Air Force or in the military versus being a police officer in the outside world. And of course, I don't say that in any way to disparage the men and women who are military police officers, but there is something of a difference. And I could see those many hours standing at the main gate of Andrews Air Force Base. I could see the police officers on the outside, what I thought then as sort of like the real police. And I knew immediately I had made the right choice in terms of pursuing a career in law enforcement, but I also really wanted to expand what I was doing in the military and move into the civilian sector and really engage in, in Prince George's County, where I ended up working for 25 years, there was no shortage of crime. Lots of violent crime, lots of drug-related murders. Prince George's County in Maryland at the time was leading the state in total murders. There were open-air drug markets. There was just tons of violent crime. And not that you want to see or have violent crime in the community in which you're living and working, but if there is going to be that level of crime, certainly as a young police officer, that's the exact place you would choose to go work. And so I was all in. Joined the Prince George's County Police Department, was incredibly humbled at the time to be selected. Every agency I know of today is underfunded, undermanned, usually by massive percentages. But at the time I applied for the Prince George's County Police Department, I was one of thousands of people who were applying for, at the time, only 50 open spots. So when they called me and said, Bill, we'd love to hire you, I was very, very humbled and incredibly grateful for the opportunity to go have the opportunity to serve any community. And it just happened to be Prince George's County. And I spent 25 years there. I rose through the ranks. I retired as a major. I was in command of the Prince George's County Police Training Academy, trying to train the next generation of men and women who, thankfully, are still willing and able to do this job.
And what do you do now?
I retired from the police department. I transitioned to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, first as the then executive director of the memorial. There are 3 pillars in the memorial fund. One is the memorial, one is the museum, and one is officer safety and wellness. And I got hired to be the executive director of the memorial. My CEO retired and departed about a year after I had been there, and the board came to me and said, we'd like you to step in an interim role as the CEO. And I, of course, was very humbled, and they, shortly after, just a few minutes later, offered me the permanent spot. So since September of last year, I have been the chief executive officer of this organization, which I hold so dear. Not me individually. I think I stand in for so many of the men and women who are in the profession or have been in the profession, recognizing that I am just one of many people in a broad network of coworkers, survivors, family members, so many of us in this profession who know too many men and women whose names are on our very sacred walls.
Bill, I'm gonna ask you one question and ask you for a little background and story, and then I'm gonna kind of hand it off to Bernie. So this little cup here right now, I know you know what it is. I know many people are watching know what it is. This was the little candle holder from the very first time that I was at the candlelight vigil. That first day was so impactful to me. That very first time to see 40,000 of these, or whatever the number was, lit up on the lawn over in DC. And then this year, I was super blessed that you invited me to read names at the vigil. And so I was on the flip side. I was not standing in the crowd. I was on the stage looking out, and it was even more overwhelming. And so this is from the first one, and I have this year's on the wall as well. But this year hit a little bit different, not just because I was on stage, but because, man, I've been blessed to get to know you, not just in this law enforcement community, but as a friend. And as someone who I consider just a brother, and I love you, man. And I knew your backstory. I knew everything that you've gone through. And when you stood on stage at the vigil this year, and you shared your story, I think that the number of lives that you impacted without even necessarily knowing it, and you'll probably never know the full extent of it, it was so overwhelming. And I found myself in tears on that stage and praying with people after for you and your family. And not just because of what you've gone through, but also because of how you continue to change lives with that. Are you willing to share that story?
Sure. Of course, Kyle is talking about the death of my daughter. My then 15-year-old daughter died almost just over 2 years ago. She died by suicide, and my wife and I happened to be on vacation at the time. And my wife's mother, my mother-in-law, was at our house taking care of our 2 kids, one of which was my son, who's now 19, but at the time he was 17, and my daughter, who was at the time 15. And we were overseas on a vacation on a cruise ship, and we got this call. What was very early local time, but for us, the middle of the day, our son was calling and saying that the police were at our house, and he was clearly confused and scared and upset. And ultimately, we learned that our daughter had died. And it was every bit as traumatic as you might imagine. It continues to be every bit as traumatic as any parent might imagine. and it was a hellscape trying to get home as quickly as possible, to some degree to regroup and even begin to contemplate and accept to some degree that our daughter had died, rushing home, but also to be with our son, who we knew was in dire straits himself mentally. And then the story that I tried to tell at the Candlelight Vigil this year was not that I in any way wanted to make the story about me or to in any way deflect from the purpose of the Candlelight Vigil, which is to honor the 282 most recently added names to our very sacred memorial, to honor the sacrifice of those 282 heroes, really. And I didn't want to necessarily equate my daughter with their deaths, but I did tell my story to say to the surviving members of that crowd, to those coworkers, the family members, that in a very, very big way, the only reason that my wife and I survived, the only reason even now I'm not sitting in the corner in the fetal position in a puddle of my own tears, is because of the network, the family of law enforcement professionals who came together and helped keep my wife and I sane. Not just my wife and I, but my whole family. And so I was trying to say to the survivors during that Candlelight Vigil, to some extent, the circumstances for why you are here are absolutely horrible. And all of us, if we could, would reverse the very reason that you are here. But to some degree, I was trying to say to the crowd, you should be thankful that if you have to go through these circumstances, all of us, myself included, are incredibly lucky to have our police family be here to help us heal, or at least begin to heal to some degree. And because without that support network, I'm certain I would not be here able to tell the story.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that first and foremost. It's kind of hard to go on from that point, but I mean, we will, because you do, in honoring your daughter. And I saw that speech. I watched it on the internet from home and was very touched, and thank you for sharing. But again, like everything, like the work you do, it touches lives. We lose too many law enforcement officers. One is too many. We know that. But the numbers are becoming at an epidemic proportion. It's beyond, belief these days. Why don't we, for people who maybe don't fully understand what the organization is, why don't we start there and talk about
Sure.
what the organization is?
Sure. So, of course, I think both of you know, but maybe I should back up and really try to give a sense of the history of Police Week and police memorializing and honoring the men and women who die in the line of duty. So I think for a number of years, even for a number of decades, I think the law enforcement profession writ large was beginning to grapple with the idea of the number of men and women who were dying in the line of duty. And how do, I'm going to say we, I hope the audience won't begrudge me saying words like we, us, our, when I still talk about and refer to what I think of as our profession. I think the profession thought we are falling short. We are falling short in terms of recognizing this very real cost, the service and sacrifice of our peers, our fellow citizens, the men and women who are able, willing to step up and to some degree sacrifice their lives for our safety. And there was no national memorial, there was no national service. And so in the late 70s and then really the early 80s, notably by organizations like Concerns of Police Survivors and the Fraternal Order of Police, began to hold what was initially sort of informal gatherings every single year in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol to help memorialize the men and women who had died in the line of duty in the year prior. And those efforts, in part, also spurred other interested parties to think about how can we more officially, more permanently recognize the sacrifice of so many of these men and women. And the idea of a national memorial sprang forth. And that was really heavily pushed by then Congressman Biaggi and Senator Pell. And they ultimately got passed in 1984 legislation which authorized the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund to come into existence. And the word fund is in the name because it was creating a fund which allowed for the collection of monies to ultimately design and then build a National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, which did get built, obviously. It's an absolutely incredibly beautiful, poignant, touching, really humbling place to stand today. 3 acres of federal land right in Judiciary Square, and these sweeping walls on the east and west sides, which today hold and catalog 24,067 names, the names of our heroes, the men and women who have died across the broad stretch of U.S. history, serving in some law enforcement capacity. And so that is the origination of the Memorial Fund and the memorial. And of course, over time, the organization grew, in part through what is now a world-class museum right across the street from the memorial, which opened in 2018. It's where we try to tell the story, in part, tell the stories of the men and women who have died serving our country, but also in a much bigger way to tell the story of American law enforcement, to tell the story of our profession. And importantly, tell the story in a way that really exemplifies and highlights the good, the positive, where the men and women in uniform have gotten it right and continue to get it right every single day, serving us, serving our communities. So that is the museum. And then we have a third and final pillar, which we refer to as officer safety and wellness. It's where we sometimes, in part, take some of the data related to those line of duty deaths that we catalog every single year, which tells us historically where, how, why men and women in uniform are facing such tragic, fatal outcomes. How can we come up with policies and best practices and then push those out in a meaningful way to try to make it safer for the men and women who are still doing the job, and by extension, make it safer for members of the public that they are sworn to protect. So that is the organization, honoring our fallen, telling the story of American law enforcement, trying to make it safer for the men and women who still, luckily for us, choose to do this job.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about emotion. I think, I mean, as you know, most of my friends are in law enforcement, right? And a lot of these dudes are afraid to be vulnerable, and because they're tough badasses who kick in doors and save babies, and they are some of the greatest warriors. But I think we have a rising problem with mental health because for the longest time society has said we don't talk about feelings, we don't talk about emotions. And I've experienced the same thing in over 1,000 surviving family members of officers killed in the line of duty that I've personally interviewed and cried with and prayed with, man. And I think that I think we have to have a national conversation about the emotions that are associated with being a part of this family. And even in doing these interviews and in hearing your story, man, I often find myself going through this sort of like roller coaster where I hear a story like that and I'm just pissed, man. Like when I hear about an officer who took their own life, or I hear about an officer killed in the line of duty, my first reaction, this is just me, but my first reaction isn't grief, it's just anger. Like I'm angry at the world, I'm angry at society getting to this point where we're losing so many innocent, good people, and then come the other wave of emotions. And then I walk into that museum and I'm filled with so much pride that we are in this country, that, man, people will put on that badge every single day and they will run towards that gunfire. Talk to me about the need to be vulnerable in this space and to be very real.
Well, I mean, emotion has been and continues to be a key element of every single man or woman who puts on the badge, who straps on a bullet-resistant vest, who puts on their gun belt every day. Emotion, in part trying to control their own emotions when they go to scenes, to try to some degree, not necessarily not be vulnerable, but recognize that they are going to encounter, they're going to see the absolute worst of humanity time after time after time. And to some degree, not that they want to close off their emotions, but they want to be guarded so that every single one of those doesn't continue to add some accumulating trauma to them and their lives, which they might bring home with their families, right? But also, and this holds true for every police officer I have ever met or worked with, is that police officers do hold such a huge well of empathy in their heart. They're going to these places where oftentimes people are having their worst day, the worst aspects of their lives, and men and women in uniform are trying to empathize, to try to put themselves in those very same circumstances and trying to say to the members of the public they're trying to help, how can I help you? How can I best help you? Sometimes that is through mechanisms of the law. Maybe they need to enforce some criminal law. But in the vast majority of circumstances, police officers go to calls for service and it has nothing to do with criminal law. They're not there to write a ticket or effect an arrest. They're there to have an impact. And it's those hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of impacts, those small touches from law enforcement members and the members of the community where they really are having an impact, which so often, in fact, maybe entirely, is not really recognized by society. There's no mass database that says how many times did Bill Alexander go on a domestic violence call and he was able to successfully pull the wife out of a bad situation or convince her to make a different life choice, right? Any of that or a million other circumstances where not just Bill Alexander, but all of the 800,000 plus men and women out on our streets today are having an impact that is not entirely measured by this, say, the crime statistics of any particular town or city.
You know, it's been interesting over the years to have different people at this wall tell different stories, and to be on the road and hearing stories. And I got to share a little story that was just shared with me from a recently retired U.S. Marshal. Amazing guy. He's now 82 years old, I believe, and he was in the New York State Police a long time ago, and they had been tracking this killer. Had brutally raped and murdered this young nurse. And it was two guys who were responsible for it, and they ended up, they started tracking video footage, surveillance footage and everything, and they found that that same day, these two guys had first approached another nurse and started walking up to her, and then they took off. And when they caught the guys, they went back and they found that nurse, and they said, you know, did you see these guys? Started interviewing her. She said, yeah, and I had a really bad feeling about it. And he said, what happened next? Did you say anything? Because it was footage only, there was no audio. And she said, no, I just got a really sick feeling in my stomach, and I just started praying. And he's interviewing the two guys after that were responsible for raping and murdering that other woman, and said, you know, were these two men, was that you? They admitted that it was. They said, why did you walk away from that woman and go target that other? And they said, well, all of a sudden we saw a huge guy, the biggest guy we've ever seen in our lives, and he was standing right near her. And she was all alone. There was nothing on camera. And it was just hearing that story just gave me the chills. He was like, man, it was the first time in my life that I just didn't understand something from a law enforcement perspective. What are some of the stories that have been shared with you over the years, whether it be through the museum or at the vigil, just some of the stories that have stuck with you and have remained a part of you as you've continued in this work?
Well, there's so many times where men and women come in and they see some memento in the museum. They see some memento that reminds me of something, some part of their lives. And so often the stories that the men and women in uniform, although they're often not in uniform in the museum, tell have nothing to do with the typical crime fighting narrative, right? It's not that they chased down the bad guy who just robbed the bank. It's not that they caught the erstwhile teenager aggressively driving through the town. It's always those small moments where they have had an emotional impact that we were just talking about and really impacted someone's life for the better. And the exact reason that so many men and women join the police department to begin with, to have that very visceral impact. I had the opportunity this most recent police week to walk with the Speaker of the House. He came in a very unassuming, humbling way. There was no press. He was not there to get his picture taken or to be seen to help memorialize the men and women. He was just there to pay tribute. And we were walking along the walls, and we both noticed a handwritten drawing from clearly a small child left behind to her father. And on this handwritten drawing, on the picture, is the child's birthday and her father's end of watch date. And her father died before she was born. And you see that and it just absolutely rips your heart out. That there before the grace of God go I, any number of times I can think where if the wind had blown 2 degrees to the left or right, if any number of variables had flipped the other way on any particular day, my name might also be on this very sacred wall. And so lots of the stories I hear when men and women come through the museum, and most pointedly for the memorial, every single police officer I know has a story where they are certain if the wind had blown just 5 miles an hour faster or in any given direction, or though that variable had flipped, there before the grace of God go I, their name would also be on the wall. And those are the stories that always leave me so humbled in part to be at this organization where I'm so privileged to be able to help tell those stories, but also reminding me and allowing me to remind the country, I hope, that every single police officer in our country today has that story, has that exact same story where just by inches, by luck, by whatever that degree mechanism is, their name would have been on the wall. And then that very next day, they suit back up. They put that vest back on, they put that gun belt back on, and they're right back in the fight to keep our community safe. Those are the stories that will forever stay with me.
Yeah. I probably put a bunch of comments into one thing. First of all, I thank you again for what you do. It's amazing. Because I think of, from my roots, you know, being a patrol officer my whole career, and how it kind of goes. My cousin's husband, Kenneth Hall, was a Connecticut State Trooper, was killed in the line of duty. So thank you for what you've done. And, you know, the state police still treats her as if she's family. You know, I'm at some Christmas party, and the Union Christmas party's there, and there she is. Hey, what are you doing? Oh, I'm here with the Connecticut State Police, you know. But what people I don't think understand is when an officer dies, there's a whole process of a lot of people integrating leading up to the memorial. You know, so really what happens is initially officer dies, the notifications are made, and there's a flood of EAP, peer support personnel. We've gone to police departments. We sit there, we comfort, we cry, we hug, support people through the funerals. The comfort dogs are there. Then we have people like Henry Morris come in from Support Our Shields a couple months later, which I think his work is so invaluable because he brings a plaque to police agencies that have lost an officer from a stranger. And what generally is the cause of death for our officers? The community. So he rebuilds those tombs. During the whole, you know, the whole process of funerals and stuff, someone from cops will show up, or more people from cops. And it's just getting people prepared for this event, your event. And then people go to the memorial. And for me, the memorial is the world. It's for law enforcement. It honestly, to me, is one of the most stress relieving events ever, because they let those emotions go. A lot of people have not, because a lot of the people that are there to honor their fallen officer have not taken that chance to grieve themselves, because they've been so busy being at the spouse's house with the kids. They've been doing things, and you know, from wearing that uniform, we delay our onset of grieving, right? We go do our things, and then we finally get a chance to decompress. And you can see, you know, you pan the crowd at the memorial, and people are just in a pool of tears. They're hugging each other. They're hugging random strangers, because this is their time. And that's what impresses me the most about that is this is it. You know, we've buried our loved one. We've done a lot of things, but this event is really the memorializing them, your service, your commitment, but also to everyone who's in attendance, who's blessed to be in attendance. In its own way, it's an appreciation of what you've done for your brothers and sisters and their families in their deepest time, because what other things people don't understand is there are so many other things going on that week. It's not just come down and honor people. There's support groups going on. You guys do a lot of other things which connected. And I'll tell you, you know, from Sheila's story, she's never felt alone in the darkest time of her life. And you're a major piece of why that occurs. And I thank you for that.
Well, I hear you, and I appreciate your gratitude. I can't take any part of that gratitude myself. It's you know, it really is all of us in the profession. And then of course I happen to work at this organization where one of our primary functions is to honor and memorialize these heroes, right? But I really do view it so humbly. I am just one among many. All of us in the profession, everyone who ever has or ever will serve, is a part of this network, a part of this family. And I think all of us, everyone who has ever worn the badge, views their strong obligation to help remember, to help tell the stories of these heroes, right? And also to some degree to be part of the process of which you're describing, to be part of the mechanism which could, and we hope, allows some level of healing. And you're absolutely right. Of course, I'm so lucky to be able to walk the memorial walls almost every single day. Almost every week, at least once a week, I see someone out there having that cathartic, really healing moment, sitting in front of a name of someone they know and love, right? But certainly during police week, that is often for many family members the first time they have seen the name of their loved one. Co-workers coming out and saying that name, and there is something very unique about the memorial space. I tell people all the time, when I walk those walls, I feel something. I really do feel something unique in that time, in that place, in that space. And I don't necessarily equate it to being a religious feeling, but there is there is a feeling of peace, a feeling of calm, a feeling of responsibility, a feeling of obligation, a feeling of honor, a feeling of standing in the midst of what is today 24,067 names of the men and women I still see as my peers, our extended family, right? And all of them and all of their families, knowing that all of us, not just those of us in the profession, right, but all of us, I would argue, as citizens of this country, have an obligation to recognize the service and sacrifice that those 24,000 names represent, and to help remember and honor their stories and their families for all time.
Bill, you have an incredible support group behind you. From my boy, shout out to Aaron Slater from Relentless Defender,
Slater.
One of the greatest men on this earth. To you've got some amazing corporate sponsors. You've got an amazing board at the organization. Let's talk about the support that you have.
We are very, very privileged to have on our board today really the who's who of major law enforcement organizations. Every single major law enforcement organization that you're aware of or your audience is aware of, they are on our board. Think National Sheriff's Association, International Association of Chiefs of Police, Fraternal Order of Police, Concerns of Police Survivors, on down the line. If you can think of them, they have a hand in sort of us as an organization. And so in part, that gives us really broad reach, a really broad network to reach out and connect with, again, what I see as my peers, this profession, to try to connect with them and remind them that we are here as a resource for them. And equally, we are here to help tell the stories of their members who have died in the line of duty. And also to help tell the story of their agencies, through the museum, tell the story of American law enforcement. So it really does give us broad and wide reach across the law enforcement sphere to have conversations about how, where, why police officers are dying, to have conversations about how can we collectively, not just the Memorial Fund, but all of our sort of organizational members, influence the conversation across the nation about law enforcement? And how can we in our member organizations help influence officer safety through officer safety and wellness? How can we collectively come up with solutions? What are we not thinking about? What have we thought about in the past that we need to change? What are we doing wrong today that we could be doing right tomorrow, that tomorrow will help save men and women and prevent their names from being added to our walls in future years? That is what we hope we are using our member organizations for.
I've seen over the years in Congress some of the stupidest funding be passed in the world, from like we're going to study the emotions of frogs and how they procreate to different flavors of bottled water. And I've seen billions of dollars thrown at the most like crazy things in the world. And here we have an amazing organization that is saving lives and touching lives, that I would love to see more financial support for from our community, because I just love you guys, man. I believe in what you're doing. We've vetted the organization, obviously, extremely thoroughly through law enforcement today, which is why we're happy to support you. You've got some corporate sponsors, and I want to take a beat here to say, go support this organization. I mean, a few bucks can make a world of difference at scale if we all start throwing our support behind them. But let's touch on, in summary, some of the corporate sponsors and what the ask is from you to this audience.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you. We have a couple of really long-term, really strong supporters. And I should preface this by saying, and I've said this before, particularly for the last 5 years or so, perhaps more, but certainly over the last 5 years, so much of the conversation, the rhetoric, I might even describe it as demonization of what I still see as our profession, right, has been occurring across all of mainstream media, popular media, social media, maybe even to a worrying degree from too many of the mouths of our elected officials, right, demonizing what I see as our profession in ways that are so often completely unfair and untrue and really disparaging to the men and women in uniform that I find really hard to take. And companies, organizations have been pulling away both publicly and privately from their support of law enforcement. Whether they want to appear to be supporting law enforcement, real or perceived, people and companies have been pulling away. And so when I have this conversation with people, to the extent that I try to push this message out, the fact that there are still companies who are willing and able to say, no, we support law enforcement, we have supported law enforcement, we continue to support law enforcement, I try to say to people, this is not like the normal platitude where at the beginning of a ceremony, people say, oh, thank you to, Starbucks for helping to put this thing on. In my case, we would not be able to do the candlelight vigil without the support of some of these corporate sponsors. We wouldn't be able to continue to memorialize the men and women and maintain our very sacred walls without the support of some of these companies. So I'm thinking of companies like Verizon, like Mission Square, like Target, like Wheelan Engineering. There are companies that support us, and more than those, and without their support, we could not exist. And that parlays into the next part, which you were very kind and generous to say to the audience, hey, consider supporting this organization. The Memorial Fund has always and continues through to today existed on donations. We do not receive a single dollar of federal, state, local money. It's entirely donation driven. And obviously I'm very passionate about it, and I think most people in law enforcement are very passionate about it. But what I am not entirely sure is, I don't know that the law enforcement community writ large really understands that we exist on donations, that the only way we will be able to continue to add names in the future and to forever honor and remember these men and women is by having enough funding to be able to support and maintain not just our memorial, but also our museum and officer safety and wellness efforts. And so I recognize finances are tight, inflation is crazy, everyone is still dealing with the after effects of COVID, but to the extent that anyone in your audience maybe has a few spare bucks at the end of the year, that they otherwise have some money that they considered giving to charitable efforts, that they might consider the Memorial Fund is one among many who might be worthy. Certainly I might argue that we might be worthy of consideration.
No doubt.
A latte runs you like $14 now. You guys could skip a latte a month and throw some coin at this amazing organization. Brother, I just love you, man. I'm so grateful for everything that you are doing personally, for everything that the organization is doing. Shameless plug for the website so that people know where to go.
NLEOMF.org. That stands for National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. So NLEOMF.org. If anyone has any questions for me or about me or the Memorial Fund, they can email me at balexander@NLEOMF.org. I'd be happy to answer any correspondence anyone has, or if they need anything. Perhaps there's someone from the department out there who's like, hey, we had some line of duty death and I've got questions. Please come see me.
Awesome. Parting thoughts?
I think, a credit to you. When we retire from this job and we hang up our gun for the last time and it's all over, many people rightfully walk away, just say, hey, I'm done. I've done my service. But it takes a real strong person to turn around and give of service again, and especially to your own family, to the police family. So I thank you personally as a retired officer for what you do out there each and every day, making impact, helping our families in their most desperate times, and bringing, like I said, resiliency to people to be able to, in their greatest time of need. Thank you so much for that.
Well, Kyle and Bernie, there's a quote on the southwest corner of the memorial. There are 4 major quotes, but the one on the southwest corner always held the most reverence from me, from then President Bush, who was at the inauguration of the memorial in 1991. And the quote starts by saying, carved on these walls is the story of America. And I'm so privileged and really honored and incredibly grateful to both of you for helping to tell a part of that American story, helping to tell and remind the public that there has been and continues to be a very real cost to maintaining our democracy. And that cost every single year is measured in hundreds of lives of men and women in uniform who have sworn to protect us. And the fact that you are willing and able, not just here through this product, but through law enforcement today and your other initiatives, to help remind the public of that terrible cost means the world to me, and by extension, I'm certain means the world to everyone, again, who ever has or ever will wear a badge. So thank you so much.
Thanks, brother. Guys, thank you for supporting this incredible organization. Thanks for hitting that share button. God bless you all. God bless America.
See you later, Mom.
Thank you for joining us at Choir Practice. For more, please visit lawenforcementtoday.com.